Hebrews chapter 11, and then over in Exodus chapter 2, verses 1 through 15 is where we're going to be today. And you might as well buckle up your seats, because I think there is a lot of conviction that comes from Moses and his choices that we're going to have to face in a culture that is very, 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 very apathetic towards the Lord. So, Hebrews chapter 11, verses 23 through 26 says this: By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, because they saw that he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. So you can keep a tab there, but we're going to jump over to Exodus chapter 2 and look at the story in its context. Well, I really dislike the word story, because it's not a story. It's a historical account of what truly transpired here. So we're going to begin with the faith of Moses' parents, because we don't want to just glance over top of that. It's important enough for the author of Hebrews to note that to us. So let's, in Exodus chapter 2, verse 1, Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could not hide him any longer, she got him in a wicker basket and covered it with tar and pitch. Then she put the child into it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to find out what would happen to him. So contextually, what's going on is the Egyptians were starting to fear the Hebrews, that they would overpopulate them, overrun them, and take over that nation. But it was never God's plan to do that. It was always God's plan to have a safe place for the nation of Israel to rise up and then expand out to the promised land, right? But the new Pharaoh, or we don't know how long it went from Joseph to this point, but at some point in time there was other pharaohs, and this Pharaoh wasn't as familiar with the Hebrew people as the Pharaoh of Joseph. So he starts to see them as a threat. And in this, he says, well, listen, this is what we're going to do. You're to abort all the males. You're to abort your children. And they didn't do that. So he then compromised and said, okay, you're going to throw all your males in the Nile River. And this is what Moses' parents were supposed to do. They were supposed to take all of their male babies, and they were to throw them in the Nile. I don't know if there's any significance about the Nile. Some are saying that it was a sacrifice to the god of the Nile. There's others that deny that. There's some that are just saying, well, it was just a means of getting rid of the children. I don't know. I feel like there's a little bit more to that, on the basis of there could have been a multitude of different ways that they commanded the death of those sons. But there was something very specific about throwing those sons into the Nile River, where there was a specific god of the Nile. So every son is, especially the firstborn sons, is to be dedicated unto the Lord. That's where eventually God would reveal this to Moses later on in Deuteronomy. But these sons were reserved for death, which is very sad, and it's very traumatic, and it's very just absolutely horrifying. But do we not find ourselves in a very similar state today in America, where there are many, 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 many people that are willingly offering up their babies, not just their babies, but their sons and daughters, unto death before they even come out of the womb? So we do have some strong parallels, and I want us to take courage and faith in what the parents of Moses did, because it was different than what the rest of the Israelites were doing. clearly different, and in some ways, we see in Moses a type of the one who is to come, Jesus Christ. We see a shadow of the substance in that a male was born to deliver his people. Moses would eventually deliver his people from the bondage, the slavery that Israel had to Egypt, the power of Egypt over Israel, and eventually the presence of Egypt in Israel. And we do see that exact same pattern in our mediator, who is Jesus Christ, who delivers us from the power of sin, the presence of sin, and the penalty of sin. So, Moses is born, and Moses' mother sees that he was a beautiful child, and so she hid him for 3 months. And let's look at what Hebrews says again. Hebrews 11:23. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, because they saw that he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. Now, if you're tracking with the story or the narrative, we see that Moses' parents, the Israelites, were to throw all of their firstborn males into the Nile at the penalty of probably death unto themselves. We're not positive at what was going to, at least severe punishment for withholding the males from that. And the Hebrew midwives also could have been severely punished. But Israel saw children as what? A blessing. Not something to be cursed, not something to be thrown away, not something to be feared or misunderstood, but they were to be a blessing, to perpetuate God's chosen people and populate and subdue the earth and have dominion over, to fulfill God's original command to man, which is to multiply image bearers of God. Now, Israel saw that, they knew that was their mission, and yet the majority of the majority of the Israelite women and men, what did they do? Instead of offering that son unto the Lord, which they should have done, in fear, they succumbed to the wishes and the ways of a pagan people that did not worship the one true God, that did not care about them, that did not desire their health and their wealth and everything that God desired for them, but they ended up doing, in submission to what the government wanted them to do at that time, sacrifice their children to the Nile River, rather than offering them up as a living sacrifice unto the Lord. Every child is beautiful, but there was something in the parents of Moses that saw that unique, beautiful nature that God has given from parents to have children and to raise them up, to know and to fear and to walk in his ways. And yet, most people in the Christian, at least in the Christian church today in America, are so willing to give their children over to whatever God may desire to possess them. I said to Angela the other day, because there was a bunch of comments about Rome. I don't know what it was. It was when in Rome. It was Rome wasn't built in a day. And then I said in a quirk, I said, you give your children over to Rome, you're going to get Romans. Yeah, there's just a bunch of different people. But it is so very true. Because something's so easy for us, because it's easier to have a double income home. But you have a problem. And my problem is I have to send my children away so that I can have a double income home, and we can have the house that we want, we can have the cars that we want, we can have the boat that we've always dreamed of, we can have all of these things, but then I say, at what cost are we going to have all those things? Are we going to sell our children to the world? Or are we going to offer them up as living sacrifices unto the Lord as we make the appropriate sacrifice? Because we don't fear man or a government or an institution, but we fear the Lord. So Moses' parents, praise God for them, they saw the preciousness of this baby boy, they said, we're not going to do that. Even if it meant that we weren't going to live. Because we fear God, not man. But also listen to this. It's not just about a fear of God and not man. It's about a choice of seeing God. Of seeing and knowing and recognizing that his value far surpasses the consequences on this earth. Because that's where we're going with Moses. And again, as parents, we have to understand something. That Moses becomes a product of his parents' faith. Because Moses made bold choices for the Lord in the future, which we're going to look at soon, that he saw the treasure that was waiting for him, so he was willing to endure the reproaches of Christ, of a world against him. And it was only because he saw that example in his parents. And he walked after that. So let's not just glance over the story of the parents today, because that did set Moses up to walk in the right direction, even though he grew up in the house of Pharaoh. Let's continue. So Moses is in a basket covered in pitch. You've all seen the cute little children's stories of Moses, a little baby in a basket of pitch floating down the river. But I can't imagine the trauma of Moses' parents and brother and sister, putting him in there knowing that it could lead to his death, but ultimately saying, I'm going to do something different and I'm going to put him in God's hands. Do you see this? They are literally putting him in God's hands. The command of Pharaoh wasn't to put the male children in a basket and send them down the river. It was to throw them in the river and sacrifice them to that river. But they did something different because they trusted in the one who is their God and will always be their God. And so in faith, they put Moses in a basket, and he floats down the river. And in faith, Miriam, Moses' sister, is following after, watching eagerly what is happening. And I don't know about you guys, but I believe in a big God who does big things for those who are his people, because it's about his glory, and who are willing to not fear man, but put their faith and trust in the one who is able to save their souls. So, at the right moment, at the right time, Moses floats down the river, and the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile, with her maidens walking alongside the Nile, and she saw the basket amongst the reeds, and sent her maid, and she brought it to her. So Pharaoh's daughter comes down, their maids are surrounding them. Moses is caught in a basket on the river. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the boy was crying, and she had pity on him, and said, "This is one of the Hebrew children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you to come from the Hebrew women, so that she may nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go ahead." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Now what's very interesting is she immediately knew that this child was Hebrew, not necessarily on his image, because it's difficult to tell babies apart, especially when they would have had the same skin color, but based off of the fact that Egyptians would never have sacrificed their children or would have willingly turned their children away and not fully cared for their responsibility. It wasn't within the Egyptian culture to do that, and it wasn't within the Hebrew culture to do that, but by fear they succumbed, except for the one that we are praising today, the faith of Moses' parents. So what we see is Pharaoh's daughter's there, Miriam is following along, and Miriam also should be given a clap for her faith, because can you imagine the audacity of a Hebrew girl coming up to the queen, essentially, the Pharaoh, the daughter of Pharaoh, a high, not just religious, but institutional individual, and saying, hey, would you like for me to go and find a nurse for this person, for this little baby? Knowing full well that they were to be sacrificed. Can you imagine the faith of doing that? She could have just been killed just by talking to Pharaoh's daughter. But she did. Because she too treasured God and his ways at this point in time. So the command then was go ahead and, by God's grace, what do we see? Miriam brought his mother, Moses' mother, to nurse the baby and then to eventually give the baby back unto Pharaoh's daughter as she released him another time into the hands of the Lord. So then Pharaoh's daughter said to her in verse 9, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages, which is also amazing that she got paid to nurse her own child. So the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son, and she named him Moses, and said, because I drew him out of the water. And this is where I want us to pick up our story today, because at the moment that Moses would have been weaned, which is a very young age, he would have been taken into the care of Pharaoh's daughter. To live where? In Pharaoh's palace. To eat what? Pharaoh's food. To have what type of bedding? Pharaoh's type of bedding. To have the softest linens and fabrics, to have the best clothing, the best food, the best chariots driving him around, the best of the best of the best that any nation can offer, because Egypt was a powerhouse at this point in time. So think about this. Moses had the best that earth has to offer. From the point of being a young little child to being a young man. He was saturated in the best things that this world has to offer and allure them with. And I want to give us a quote here to start where we're going. Fenelon in Christian Perfection writes this: a peasant shut up in his village only partially knows his wretchedness. But let him see rich palaces, a superb court, and he will realize all the poverty of his village. He cannot endure its hovels after a sight of so much magnificence. It is thus that we see our ugliness and our worthlessness in the beauty and infinite grandeur of God. That quote doesn't directly fit into this context, but what I want us to see is something very, very, very important. Moses had everything his sinful soul could ever want. Everything. You talk about eating chocolate desserts and porterhouse steaks and fries and the best vegetables, like whatever it is that you're like, oh my goodness, if I could just have that, I would be so happy. And he saw how his family and his Hebrew people were living. He saw it in hovels, as slaves, enduring hostile treatment from the Egyptians, not being treated in equal value, not having the precious, the things, not precious, the things that the Egyptians had, let alone he had. He had tasted the mansions of the world. He has seen with his eyes the hovels, the poverty of his people, the pain and the suffering, as opposed to this light living. And what did he do? I have to read Hebrews here. What did Moses choose? Verse 24 of chapter 11 in Hebrews, by faith, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. refused to associate with not only them, not only Pharaoh's daughter, but everything that they associated with. The food, the posterity, the success, the high thinking, the worship, all of that. He said, no, I refuse that. And you have to be thinking, my goodness, what would cause an individual in their right mind to say, I don't want those things? I've had them. I grew up with them. And if I continued to walk in this way, I would have them in abundance all the way to my dying breath. I would lack for nothing, and everybody would fear me, everybody would respect me, and everybody would bow down to me because that is the place that I am at. And he says, no. What in someone's right mind would cause them to say no to that? And yes to all of the suffering of the Egyptian people. And yes to the uncertainty of where they are going and what they are doing. Because they were slaves. Yes, they had clung to the promise that one day they would be delivered from the power and presence and penalty of the Egyptians, but it wasn't known when and how and where. So not only was he getting rid of those things, but he was uncertain about his future. He was receiving all of the shame and the poverty and the lifestyle of the people of God. What caused him to do that? Verse 24 told us, it said, by faith. Did it not? By faith. It is faith where our seeing becomes sight. It is by choosing to be and to see the glory of God in this land of our affliction that we then can be a people like Moses that would say, listen, all of those things that this world has to offer, all of it is like just chasing the wind. I think I'm going to catch it and I'm going to grab it and it's going to be full of treasure and satisfy my innermost being. And he says, no, it didn't satisfy me for a minute. Not for a second was I satisfied. In fact, if you're anything like Moses, you've probably been there where you're always chasing something. Chasing a better paycheck. Chasing a better job. You're chasing better children. You're chasing a better status amongst the world. You're chasing something better. You're chasing the next high, whatever that may look like for you. You're chasing, and every time you consume more and more and more, none of it ever satisfies. And Moses had it all, and Moses can speak from experience. None of it satisfied. So what did he choose? By faith, he said, I'm not going to set my sight on these things, but I'm going to look forward to what lies ahead, whose builder and maker of a city in heaven, an eternal dwelling place is God. And this is the pattern of faith. Let me remind us of this as we back up slightly in Hebrews chapter 11, where Enoch was praised for he obtained the witness that before his being taken up he was pleasing to God, and without faith it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. And then later when we see about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, By faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out into a place where he was to receive for an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he lived as an alien in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise. For he was looking for what? For the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Like, just take a moment. Think of everything that God has made. Everything. The beauty and the wonder of a single flower. The complexity of a bee with its hive. The sheer terror of a shark ginormously swimming right next to you. A bird in flight. God has designed and made so much beauty. And when by faith you look at God and say, my goodness, I'm looking at you and what you have made, and I see that the things that you make are absolutely beautiful and complex and far beyond what I can even grasp. And yet, all of that doesn't even compare to the beauty and perfection and infinite wonder of who you are and where you are and what you're building and what you are doing. And if we just take a moment just to look at that in the smallest thing and then say, God is infinitely greater than that thing that you're dwelling on. And then if you even wanted to take everything that's beautiful, if you wanted to take everything that's wonderful, everything that is precious gold and silver and precious stones and beautiful diamonds and flowers and fields and lilies and trees and creatures of the sea and in the depths in the sky and all of that and in all of its beauty and wonder and put it in one spot, and you would be tempted to be like, my goodness, this is absolutely amazing. But then there's these created angels that are far more beautiful and terrific than that, and all of that, God has created all of it. All of it. All of it. And if we can just look at the infinite grandeur of God by faith, like Moses did, then even if the world was to give you all of its riches, was to take you and to place you in the best of palaces and say, you will have everything you would ever want and desire for your entire life. But you can't have God. That would be the worst exchange anyone could ever make. And that's where Moses was. He had it all. Everything. But by faith, when he had grown up in Pharaoh's palace, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to do what? Because there's only one other option: to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. That's the choice. If Moses rejected these things, these passing pleasures of sin, this is what he was left with. He was left with this and this alone: suffering, hunger, thirst, slavery. But he saw that. And in faith, what did he do? He made the conscious choice to reject that, to suffer for a brief time. And our time on this earth is brief in retrospect to eternity. He made the choice to suffer rather than enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, because that road leads to one place and one place only, eternal destruction. Why? He considered the reproach of Christ greater than the riches and treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Listen, I live in this flesh, and in this flesh dwells sin, and I understand the nature of sin that constantly, like a ferret, wants to go after shiny things and says, oh, wouldn't it be better to have this? Wouldn't you be more happy to have this? Wouldn't it be more pleasing, or wouldn't your life be easier if you had this? And it's so easy for us as humans to get blinded and carried away and caught up and entangled in the weeds of sin that promises all these things, and it can never deliver. It can never satisfy you. But like Moses, we can make the choice to say no and to set our gaze upon the Lord of glory, Jesus Christ, and say, He is my eternal pursuit, and He has promised this, that though I suffer now in this body, my life will not end in suffering. It will end in glory. Though I live in a hovel here on earth, I have seen and I have tasted this eternal kingdom that is promised by God for His people, if they would truly step forward in repentance and faith and grab hold of Christ and say, I will not let you go until you bless me, and over and over and over tenaciously clinging to Him, saying, God, this world absolutely stinks. But you are altogether lovely. And Moses made that choice. And that choice led to an action. And we need to see that. Because our faith is essentially putting our trust in someone or something and in its ways, and that faith always leads to action. So Moses rejected the right to be called Pharaoh's daughter or Pharaoh's son, and then instead suffered the reproach of his people, and he did it in this way. It was a conscious choice because he was looking forward to the reward. Now, in verse 11, it came about in those days when Moses had grown up that he went out to his brethren and looked on their hard labors, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that, and when he saw there was no one around, he struck the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Moses took action in a way that wasn't God's timing. But it was action according to his faith. And he went out the next day, and behold, two Hebrews were fighting with each other. And he said to the offender, why are you striking your companion? But he said, who made you a prince or judge over us? Are you intending to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid and said, surely the matter has become known. When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he tries to kill Moses, but Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. Moses goes from the son of Pharaoh, grandson of Pharaoh, to eventually rejected by the people of God, to then becoming a shepherd, a lowly shepherd in the land of Midian, and the Egyptians despised shepherds. And we could be thinking, woe is Moses right now. He was just trying to do something good. Moses, God, why aren't you with Moses? He made the right decision. He stopped enjoying the fruit of the vain pleasures of sin in Egypt, and he made the right decision to follow you, and he's trying to deliver your people, doing your work, and yet now woe is him because he's in this desert land suffering as a shepherd, and he's not accomplishing anything with his life. Woe is Moses. But can I just say that I don't think Moses had that woe is me attitude? I don't think he had that. I don't think Moses stopped seeking this reward that he chose. I think Moses continued to suffer the reproach of this world, to suffer as a people of Christ, to suffer and to suffer well, not knowing what was going to happen to him or his people. Faith doesn't need to know. Faith just needs to continually set its eyes, upon the glory of the one who has called them out of the darkness and into the marvelous life, and be faithful today with where you are at. Always looking forward to being in the presence of the Lord Jesus Christ. And does not the Scriptures also edify that later on? For it says that Jesus is coming in Hebrews for those who are eagerly awaiting the coming of this great and awesome Lord. And I know of no better way to eagerly await the coming of the Lord than to look at him with faith. Say, I know this circumstance. I see this circumstance, but I choose not to doubt in the God who is preparing an eternal dwelling place far more wonderful than anything this earth has. In fact, all of this earth will be like a hovel, a cardboard box, in comparison to the glory that awaits us. So look to him with faith.